December in 1941, Whitby, Ontario. A quiet farming town sat covered in snow, just 30 miles east of Toronto. The land was peaceful. The war felt far away, but across the Atlantic Ocean, British intelligence was dying. And what would happen next in this small Canadian town would eventually make Adolf Hitler furious. The numbers told a terrible story. 7 out of every 10 British spies sent into Nazi-occupied Europe were dead within 6 months. Some lasted only weeks. Others disappeared within days of parachuting behind enemy lines. The Gestapo was winning. German counterintelligence had become a machine of death. Every month, more trained agents vanished into Nazi prisons. Every month, the intelligence networks across France, Belgium, and the Netherlands grew weaker. Britain was running out of spies faster than they could train new ones. The problem was simple but deadly. Britain trained all its secret agents on British soil. This made sense to the experts. Keep everything close. Keep everything under control. Train agents in Scotland, in the countryside, in hidden facilities across England. But German bombs fell on British cities every night. The Luftwaffe knew where these training camps were. Worse, German spies had infiltrated Britain. They watched. They reported. They learned the methods. Then they taught the Gestapo exactly what to look for when British agents arrived in occupied territory. The old ways were failing. British intelligence chiefs met in smoke-filled rooms in London. They argued about solutions. Some wanted better training. Others wanted different cover stories. A few suggested sending agents in through different routes. But the core problem remained. Every spy trained in Britain was prepared using methods the Germans had already figured out. The Nazis knew the British playbook. They knew the radio codes. They knew the hand signals. They knew everything. American intelligence was even worse off. The Office of Strategic Services had just been created. They had 0 trained operatives. Not a single American spy knew how to work behind enemy lines. The United States had joined the war after Pearl Harbor, but they had no idea how to fight in the shadows. They needed help desperately. They needed trainers. They needed facilities. They needed everything, and they needed it fast. Into this disaster walked a man named William Stephenson. Most people had never heard of him. He was Canadian by birth, but worked for British intelligence. His code name was Intrepid. He was short, quiet, and unremarkable to look at. But his mind worked differently than the other intelligence chiefs. While they focused on fixing the old system, Stephenson saw that the entire system needed to be thrown away. Stephenson looked at a map one cold morning in his New York office. His finger traced the Atlantic Ocean. Britain sat within easy reach of German bombers. Every training facility could be hit. Every secret location could be compromised. But then, his finger moved west. Canada, 3,000 miles from the nearest German aircraft. Impossible to bomb. Impossible to infiltrate easily. Vast wilderness, secure borders, and most importantly, it was British Commonwealth territory with a government that could be trusted. The idea seemed obvious to Stephenson, but it was radical to everyone else. British intelligence experts dismissed it immediately. Sir Stuart Menzies, the head of MI6, thought it was absurd. Train spies in Canada? Impossible. Too far away. Too difficult to manage. Too expensive. The expertise was in Britain. The instructors were in Britain. The experience was in Britain. Moving everything across the ocean made no sense to men who had run intelligence operations the same way for decades. Stephenson faced meeting after meeting with resistance. Senior officers explained to him, very patiently, why his idea would never work. You cannot build a spy school from scratch, they said. You cannot train agents properly without the established British system. You cannot expect Canadians to understand the complexities of European espionage. The war would be over before such a facility could even become operational. Besides, what did a Canadian businessman know about running intelligence operations? But Stephenson had one crucial advantage. He understood something the old guard did not. Geography was the ultimate security. It did not matter how good German intelligence was if their planes could not reach you. It did not matter how many spies they had in Britain if the training happened somewhere they could not touch. The English Channel was 21 miles wide. German bombers crossed it every night. The Atlantic Ocean was 3,000 miles wide. No German aircraft could cross it. Not now. Not ever. Stephenson kept pushing. He had powerful friends. Prime Minister Winston Churchill trusted him. So did President Franklin Roosevelt. In the smoky clubs and quiet offices where real decisions got made, Stephenson made his case again and again. Britain was losing the intelligence war. The old methods had failed. Continuing to do the same thing while expecting different results was madness. The Allies needed a new approach. They needed a training facility the Germans could not bomb, could not infiltrate, and could not stop. They needed it in North America. They needed it now. The revelation came to him fully formed one evening in November. Britain and America needed more than just a safe training location. They needed to completely rebuild how spies were created. Forget the old gentleman's club approach. Forget the idea that intelligence work was about Cambridge graduates and social connections. Modern espionage needed killers who could blend in. It needed radio operators who could work under pressure. It needed saboteurs who knew explosives. It needed agents trained in methods so new that the Gestapo would not recognize them when they appeared in occupied Europe. And all of this had to happen beyond Hitler's reach, in a place he could discover but never destroy. Churchill gave his approval in late November. Roosevelt agreed to support it. Stephenson finally had permission to build his impossible spy school. Stephenson moved fast. Within days of getting approval, he found the perfect location. A farm sat on the shore of Lake Ontario, just outside the small town of Whitby. The property covered 275 acres. Dense forest provided cover. The lake offered water access. Most importantly, it was remote enough for secrecy, but close enough to Toronto for supplies. The farm belonged to a man who asked no questions when the government made an offer. By late November 1941, the property belonged to British Security Coordination. Construction crews arrived in early December. They worked through freezing temperatures and snow. The main farmhouse would serve as headquarters. New buildings went up quickly. A large wooden structure for classroom training. Smaller buildings for weapons practice. A communications center for radio operations. The crews worked around the clock. Stephenson had given them a deadline. The facility needed to be operational by December 6th. That gave them less than 3 weeks. The training program Stephenson designed was unlike anything British intelligence had ever attempted. Traditional spy training took 6 months and focused on languages, culture, and social skills. Stephenson threw all of that out. His course would last 8 weeks. Students would train 18 hours per day. They would learn 12 different methods of silent killing. They would master explosives and sabotage techniques. They would become expert radio operators who could send coded messages while under extreme stress. They would learn to parachute at night into hostile territory. Most importantly, they would learn to survive. The instructors came from unusual backgrounds. Stephenson recruited a former Shanghai policeman who knew every dirty fighting trick used in the roughest city on earth. A Canadian explosives expert who had worked in mining camps. British commandos who had survived operations in Norway. Each instructor was the best at one specific skill. None of them cared about the old, polite ways of doing things. They cared about keeping agents alive. The first class arrived on December 6th, right on schedule. 19 men walked through the gates of what would soon be known as Camp X. 7 were American. The Office of Strategic Services had sent their first volunteers. 6 were Canadian. 5 were British. 1 was a free French officer who had escaped Paris. They ranged in age from 22 to 38. Some had military backgrounds, others were civilians. All of them had volunteered for something they did not fully understand yet. The first day shocked them. They woke at 5 in the morning. Physical training began immediately in the dark, freezing cold, running through the forest in the snow, crawling under barbed wire, swimming in the icy lake water. Breakfast came at 7, then weapons training until noon. After a quick lunch, they learned hand-to-hand combat. Late afternoon meant radio operations and cryptography. Evening brought explosives training, lights out at 11, then up again at 5 the next morning. But the Canadian government was having serious doubts. Officials in Ottawa heard rumors about what was happening at the Whitby farm. They called it a murder school. Training men to kill silently seemed wrong. Teaching sabotage techniques felt like preparing terrorists. Canada was at war with Germany, yes, but this felt different. This felt dark. Several cabinet members went to Prime Minister Mackenzie King with their concerns. King was a cautious man. He did not like controversy. The idea of a secret spy training camp on Canadian soil worried him greatly. What if the public found out? What if newspapers learned that foreign agents were being trained to kill people in a quiet Ontario town? The political disaster would be enormous. King called a secret meeting with his closest advisors. They debated shutting the whole operation down. Then, Winston Churchill personally contacted King. The British Prime Minister made it simple. Britain was losing the intelligence war. Without Camp X, the spy networks in Europe would collapse completely. Germany would have free rein to operate without opposition. The invasion of Europe, whenever it came, would fail without proper intelligence. Churchill needed this facility. He needed it to remain secret. And he needed the Canadian government to look the other way. King agreed, but only under strict conditions. The camp would remain completely secret. No public records. No official acknowledgement. If anyone asked, the government knew nothing. The facility would be listed as a military communications research station. Nothing more. King put his agreement in writing and marked it top secret. Then he locked it in his personal safe. Back at Camp X, the first class was proving Stephenson right. Week 3 brought live ammunition exercises. Instructors fired machine guns over the heads of students as they crawled through obstacle courses. Real bullets cracked through the air just inches above them. The sound was deafening. The smell of gunpowder mixed with dirt and sweat. Students learned what combat actually felt like. They learned to function while terrified. Week 5 focused on interrogation resistance. Students were captured, tied up, and questioned aggressively for hours. They learned techniques to resist breaking under pressure. Some students quit during this week. They could not handle it. Stephenson let them go with no shame. Better to quit here than to break under Gestapo torture in occupied France. Week 7 brought everything together. Students went on mock missions through the Canadian wilderness. They parachuted at night. They radioed coded messages back to headquarters. They sabotaged fake targets. They evaded capture teams hunting them through the forests. The exercises lasted 48 hours straight with no sleep. Those who completed them successfully graduated. The first class finished on February 2nd, 1942. 16 of the original 19 students graduated. 3 had quit or been removed. Of those 16 graduates, 15 were deployed to Europe within 2 weeks. They parachuted into France. They made contact with resistance networks. They began radio operations immediately. Then the results came in. By June 1942, 4 months after deployment, 13 of the 15 Camp X graduates were still alive and operating successfully. 2 had been captured, but both had resisted interrogation long enough for their networks to escape. 13 out of 15 alive. That was an 85% survival rate. Compare that to traditionally trained British agents, where only 3 out of 10 survived their first 6 months. The numbers spoke clearly. Camp X worked. Word spread quickly through Allied intelligence services. The Americans wanted more training slots immediately. The British sent class after class. Even the Canadians, who had been skeptical, began sending their own intelligence officers for training. By summer 1942, Camp X was running 3 classes simultaneously. Each class had 25 students. The facility was producing 75 trained agents every 8 weeks. Stephenson expanded operations. More buildings went up. More instructors arrived. The little farm outside Whitby became a machine for creating spies. By mid-1942, Over 200 agents had passed through its gates. Each one carried skills that German counterintelligence had never encountered before. Each one had been trained in methods the Gestapo did not understand, and each one had been prepared in a place Adolf Hitler could not touch, no matter how much he wanted to. By early 1943, Camp X had transformed from an experiment into the backbone of Allied intelligence operations. Over 600 agents had passed through its gates. The quiet farm outside Whitby was now producing spies faster than any facility in history. 3 classes ran simultaneously, each with 30 students. Every 8 weeks, 90 new graduates deployed to Europe. The mathematics of war had shifted. Where Britain once lost 7 agents for every 10 deployed, Camp X graduates survived at rates never seen before. 8 out of 10 made it through their first year. This was revolutionary. The impact showed up in every theater of war. In Norway, Camp X trained agents helped Norwegian resistance fighters destroy the Vemork heavy water plant. The mission prevented Nazi Germany from developing atomic weapons. In France, graduates rebuilt shattered resistance networks that traditional British agents could not sustain. They trained local fighters. They coordinated sabotage operations. They sent intelligence back to London that helped plan the eventual invasion. In the Netherlands, Camp X agents ran networks that rescued downed Allied pilots and smuggled them back to England. Hundreds of airmen owed their lives to these networks. The sounds of Camp X became familiar to anyone within 5 miles. The crack of rifle fire echoed through the forests at all hours. Machine guns rattled during live fire exercises, their sound carrying across the frozen lake in winter. Students shouted commands in multiple languages. Explosions from the demolition range shook windows in nearby farmhouses. Local residents learned not to ask questions. They knew something important was happening, even if they did not know exactly what. Winter training separated the strong from the weak. Temperatures dropped to 20 degrees below 0 Celsius. Students practiced silent movement through snow-covered forests. Their breath came out in clouds. Their fingers went numb handling weapons and radio equipment. The cold was intentional. Instructors explained that occupied Europe in winter was brutal. If you could not function in Canadian cold, you would die in a French forest. Students learned to reload rifles with frozen fingers. They learned to operate radios while their hands shook from cold. They learned that discomfort was temporary, but mission failure was permanent. The smell of cordite hung permanently over the training grounds. Gunpowder mixed with pine trees and winter air created a unique scent that graduates remembered for the rest of their lives. The demolition range smelled of TNT and burned wood. The hand-to-hand combat areas smelled of sweat and dirt. These were not pleasant smells, but they were honest. War did not smell like anything clean or nice, and Camp X did not pretend otherwise. Then in mid-1943, German intelligence discovered something that changed everything. The Abwehr, Nazi Germany's military intelligence service, intercepted coded radio transmissions from occupied France. The messages were different from normal British intelligence traffic. The operators used new techniques. The coding systems were unfamiliar. German cryptographers worked for weeks to break the codes. When they finally succeeded, they found references to a training facility in Canada. More intercepts followed. German agents in neutral countries picked up rumors, captured resistance fighters. Under torture, mentioned Canadian-trained operatives working in their networks. The intelligence reports reached Berlin in June 1943. They landed on the desk of Admiral William Canaris, the head of the Abwehr. Canaris was a professional spy who had run intelligence operations for decades. He read the reports carefully. Then he read them again. A major Allied training facility operating in North America. Hundreds of agents being produced every month. All of them trained in methods German counterintelligence had never encountered. And most frustrating of all, the facility was completely beyond German reach. Canaris brought the information to Adolf Hitler personally. The meeting took place in the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's military headquarters in East Prussia. According to officers present at the meeting, Hitler's reaction was immediate and furious. He demanded to know why German intelligence had not discovered this facility earlier. He wanted to know exact details. How many agents? What training methods? How long had it been operating? Canaris explained what they knew. The facility was called Camp X. It sat on the shore of Lake Ontario in Canada. It had been operational since December 1941. Conservative estimates suggested over 600 agents trained there so far. The training focused on sabotage, silent killing, radio operations, and resistance to interrogation. Graduates had an 85% survival rate compared to 30% for traditionally trained British agents. Hitler's reported response became infamous in German intelligence circles. He looked at Canaris and said words that captured the complete frustration of the Nazi leadership. They are training terrorists in the forests of Canada while we cannot even touch them. The statement was accurate. Germany had no ability to strike at North America. No bombers could reach that far. No sabotage teams could infiltrate Canada successfully. The Allies had created a spy factory in the one place Hitler could not destroy it. German propaganda tried to turn Camp X into a scandal. Nazi radio broadcasts described it as a Canadian murder school. They called it a terrorist training camp. They claimed the Allies were preparing war criminals who would be tried after Germany won the war. Josef Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, gave speeches condemning the facility. None of it mattered. The propaganda could not stop operations. It could not prevent new classes from graduating every 8 weeks. It could not kill the agents already operating in Europe. The Germans tried to adapt. They trained interrogators to recognize Camp X techniques. They taught Gestapo officers what to look for when searching for Canadian-trained spies. They changed their own counterintelligence methods to account for the new threats. But they were always one step behind. Every time they figured out one technique, Camp X graduates showed up using different methods. The training evolved constantly based on reports from the field. What worked last month might not work this month, so the instructors changed the curriculum. British intelligence compared Camp X results to their own traditional training facilities. The numbers were embarrassing. Traditional facilities took 6 months to produce an agent. Camp X took 8 weeks. Traditional training had a 30% survival rate. Camp X had 85%. Traditional methods cost twice as much per agent. Camp X was cheaper, faster, and dramatically more effective. Some old intelligence officers refused to accept it. They insisted that proper spycraft required the traditional approach, but the bodies told a different story. Traditional agents died. Camp X agents survived. By late 1943, Camp X had become essential to Allied invasion planning. Graduates were being pre-positioned throughout France in preparation for D-Day. They would guide paratroopers to landing zones. They would sabotage German communications. They would organize French resistance to attack behind German lines when the invasion began. The success or failure of the largest invasion in history would partly depend on agents trained at a farm in Ontario. The facility ran at maximum capacity every day. Dawn brought the sound of instructors shouting orders. Recruits ran through obstacle courses as machine gun fire cracked overhead. Midday brought explosives training, the boom of controlled detonations echoing across the lake. Afternoon meant close combat practice, the thud of bodies hitting mats mixing with grunts of effort. Evening brought radio practice, the quiet clicking of Morse code keys in darkened rooms. Night brought more running, more shooting, more training. The pace never stopped. Camp X had proven something important. Innovation in warfare was not just about new weapons or new tactics. Sometimes the biggest advantage came from changing how you prepared people. The Nazis had better tanks than anyone in 1940, but by 1943, the Allies had better spies. And those spies were trained in a place Hitler discovered but could never destroy, could see but never reach, could rage about but never stop. Camp X reached its peak of operations in early 1944. By then, the facility had become a well-oiled machine. Every 8 weeks, like clockwork, new graduates deployed to Europe. The training had been refined through 2 years of constant improvement. Instructors learned from every mission report. When agents died, their final radio transmissions were studied to understand what went wrong. When agents survived impossible situations, their techniques were added to the curriculum. The course evolved based on real combat experience, not theory from comfortable offices in London, but the war was changing. By spring 1944, Allied invasion plans for France were nearly complete. Thousands of agents were already in place across occupied Europe. The desperate need for new spies had passed. The intelligence networks were rebuilt and functioning. Camp X had served its purpose. In April 1944, the facility began winding down operations. The final class graduated on April 15th. The students had no idea they were the last. They deployed to Europe just like all the graduates before them. Then the gates of Camp X closed. The exact number of agents trained at Camp X remains classified even today. By early 1943, over 600 agents had passed through the facility, but the Canadian government has never confirmed the actual total. Some records were destroyed. Others remain locked in classified archives. Some historians believe the real figure might be even higher when you count all the military personnel, resistance fighters, and foreign nationals who received specialized training there. Some secrets stay buried. What happened to all those agents tells different stories. Many survived the war and went home to normal lives. They became teachers, businessmen, factory workers, and farmers. They never spoke about their time in France, or Norway, or the Netherlands. The Official Secrets Act kept them silent for decades. Some took their stories to the grave, dying without ever telling even their own children what they had done during the war. A few broke the silence in old age, giving interviews to historians. Their accounts provide glimpses into how effective Camp X training really was. Others were not so lucky. Dozens of Camp X graduates died behind enemy lines. Some were shot while on missions. Others were captured and executed by the Gestapo. A few simply disappeared, their fates unknown. The survival rate was higher than traditional training produced, but 85% still meant 15 out of every 100 died. Those deaths weighed heavily on the instructors who trained them. Several instructors later said the hardest part was knowing that men they taught hand-to-hand combat or radio operations or explosives handling might be dead within months. William Stephenson survived the war and received recognition for his work, though not in the way most people would expect. King George VI knighted him in 1945, making him Sir William Stephenson, but the citation for his knighthood mentioned nothing about Camp X. It referenced his general contributions to British intelligence. The public had no idea what he had actually accomplished. Stephenson did not seem to mind. He was a spy after all. Spies work in shadows. The facility itself was dismantled quickly. Buildings were torn down or converted to other uses. The Canadian government wanted no evidence left behind. By 1946, the property looked like a normal farm again. Local residents who had heard explosions and gunfire for years watched the transformation with relief. Peace was quiet. For decades, Camp X existed only in classified files locked away in government archives in Ottawa, London, and Washington. But the ideas and methods from Camp X did not disappear. They spread throughout the intelligence world. When the United States created the Central Intelligence Agency in 1947, they based their training programs on Camp X principles, short, intensive courses, focus on practical skills over theory, live ammunition exercises, resistance to interrogation training. The CIA facility at Camp Peary in Virginia, known as the Farm, is essentially Camp X rebuilt on American soil. It still operates today, using many of the same techniques Stephenson developed. British intelligence also adopted Camp X methods. MI6 and the Special Operations Executive merged their training programs after the war. The new courses looked nothing like the old gentleman's club approach from before 1941. They looked like Camp X, tough physical training, weapons expertise, practical fieldcraft. The polite 6-month language and culture courses were gone. Modern spy training was born in that Ontario farmhouse. Military special forces around the world studied what made Camp X effective. The British Special Air Service, American Special Forces, Canadian Joint Task Force 2, and special operations units from dozens of countries incorporated Camp X principles. The idea that elite soldiers needed specialized training in unconventional warfare came directly from Stephenson's approach. Today, every major military has special forces. In 1941, the concept barely existed. Camp X helped change that. The secret finally came out in the 1970s. Documents were declassified. Former agents began talking. Historians pieced together the story. The Canadian government erected a commemorative plaque near the original site in 1984. It sits on the shore of Lake Ontario, not far from where students once trained in freezing water. The plaque is small and easy to miss. It mentions that Camp X existed and that it trained Allied agents. That is all. Some mysteries remain. What does Camp X teach us beyond its direct impact on intelligence training? The story reveals something important about innovation during crisis. When Britain faced disaster in 1941, the old experts insisted on doing things the traditional way. They had decades of experience. They had established methods. They were certain they knew best, and they were completely wrong. It took an outsider, a Canadian businessman turned spy, to see what they could not. Sometimes the best solutions come from people willing to ignore conventional wisdom entirely. The story also shows the power of geography in warfare. Hitler had the most advanced military in Europe. His tanks were better, his planes were faster, his army was larger. But he could not bomb a farm in Ontario. All his military might meant nothing against 3,000 miles of ocean. The Allies understood this. They put their most important spy training facility in the one place Hitler could see, but never touch. That is strategic thinking at its finest. There is a deeper lesson about psychological warfare too. Hitler knowing about Camp X but being unable to stop it was perhaps more valuable than keeping it completely secret. The Nazi leadership spent time and resources worrying about agents they could not prevent from being trained. They developed countermeasures against techniques they could only guess at. They lived with the knowledge that somewhere in Canada, beyond their reach, the Allies were preparing their destruction. That kind of psychological pressure has value beyond any single mission. Camp X proved that sometimes the most devastating weapon is not a bomb or a gun. Sometimes it is knowledge. Sometimes it is training. Sometimes it is the ability to prepare people so well that they can operate behind enemy lines and survive. The Nazis had better tanks in 1940. The Allies had better spies by 1943. In the end, the spies mattered more. They gathered intelligence that guided bombers. They organized resistance that disrupted supply lines. They enabled the invasion that ended the war. All of it started at a farm outside Toronto that most people have never heard of. The next time you face a problem that seems impossible to solve using traditional methods, remember Camp X. The answer might not be to work harder using the old approach. The answer might be to throw out everything you know and start fresh. Find a place your enemies cannot reach. Develop methods they do not understand. Move fast. Train hard. And most importantly, be willing to ignore everyone who tells you it cannot be done. Sometimes the impossible just needs someone brave enough to try.